Good evening and thanks for joining us for CBS News Detroit at 7. I'm Amir Makupson. Today's headlines have been dominated with labor and union negotiations in multiple industries, including entertainment, shipping, and automotive. Tonight, we're going to begin our show with the discussions on the biggest local implications of that automotive part in particular. That's the talks between the UAW and the big three automakers. The union president has said that they plan to demand pay raises, elimination of wage tiers, and the return of cost of living pay. Many auto analysts believe that the UAW and automakers are headed for a strike, and union leaders have told members to be prepared. Joining us now to discuss things a little bit further is Rick Fanning and Merrick Masters. Thank you both for being here. Rick, a senior counsel at Clark Hill and a labor and employment attorney. And Dr. Merrick Masters, a professor at Wayne State with expertise in workplace issues, including union and labor. That's my master's alma mater. So hello,
yes.
Warrior.
Well, good to meet you, Warrior.
Good to meet you, too. So to get things started, and anybody jump in first, what are the main sticking points or the contentious issues, do you think, between the UAW and the big three?
I can jump in. I think you see in a lot of these, all of the issues we're going to be talking about is adjusting to changes in the marketplace. Particularly, the UAW has mentioned electric vehicles, battery manufacturers are going to be a big part of it, as well as looking at getting in from the union standpoint, getting back some of the things that they made concessions on during the Great Recession and during the COVID pandemic, things that perhaps the automakers believed were now permanent parts of business. The unions are now seeing these as things that they want to change back to where they were before, now that the economy's doing better, things like two-tier wages, things of that nature.
Yeah, the cost of living, which I would think is fair, right? Is that not fair for them to want those back?
Well, it's understandable why they want them back, but you have to look at the broader context. I would say that the arching issue under which everything falls is the transition to electrification. And what the UAW wants is a fair and just transition, and that basically means they want as many of these workers covered by current UAW wages and wages set by the UAW going forward. And inflation has been relatively low over the past several years, and it peaked at 9% last year. It's dropped down to 3% now, and it's going toward the direction that the Federal Reserve would like it at 2%. If you were to adopt a COLA, that would substantially increase the fixed costs of the companies and make it difficult for them to finance electrification. That's the challenge. And the parties are going to have to wrestle with a lot of other difficult challenges in this process. Only part of them can be solved, I might say, by collective bargaining. You're not going to solve the electrification problem, wages in the electrification wing of the industry, unless you do two other things. One, have a public policy that addresses it. And number two, you have the UAW organize the battery plants that are non-union and also the transplants, because the companies benchmark their wages to the transplants and to the non-union electrical companies such as Tesla. And there are substantial differences between what they pay and what those non-union electrical companies pay.
And is that because of having the union that the cost ultimately is more?
Well, the union has been perhaps a victim of its own success. It has substantially raised wages, and I'll give you an example. At Ford, they pay $64 an hour in wages. The transplants pay $55 an hour in wages and benefits, and at Tesla, it's $45 to $50 an hour.
So I would think then that you would want to be in a union and work at a place where you would get more.
There are certainly some advantages to being in a union. The wages, the economics. There are also some detractions in terms of having things negotiated for you on your behalf. There can be less flexibility in terms of job assignments, movements. Things are, there's a good thing about having a collective bargaining agreement, and that everything's written down. Mm-hmm. There's also a bad thing of a collective bargaining agreement, and that everything's written down.
Yeah.
And so it can be both. There can be both pluses and minuses.
Yeah, and I can understand the automotive companies being concerned about that transition to electric vehicles, but same with the union workers. I would think that they have those same concerns.
There are common interests between the parties, but they approach the negotiations from different perspectives, and the role that labor should play in financing electrification. From the union's perspective, they don't believe that they should be the first element of our factor of production on the chopping line whenever it comes to trying to finance electrification. They would prefer that the companies look at other things to streamline their costs, and that they be the standard for the industry rather than having the transplants be the standard and the Teslas be the standard. That's a philosophical difference in orientation, and what you see with this new union leadership on the part of the UAW is a different approach towards negotiations. It's a new attitude that they're bringing to the table.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about it?
Well, I think that new attitude, you can see that, in things like for the first time, and at least in modern memory, there didn't start with a handshake ceremony.
Yeah, they've made a very big deal about that too.
Right, and new union leadership of the UAW that has been very openly, and even when Mr. Fain campaigned for his role as president, was very clear about the direction he wanted to take these negotiations and wanted to take the UAW. And you see that playing out. And I do think that, he is going to continue, and his team is going to continue to set forth, a very firm position. I expect that he and the companies will work to try to avoid a strike, and will work hard to find the solutions to those problems. But you see them both coming in and with that kind of rhetoric, it's why people are making the predictions that they are.
Yeah. Well, we will talk more about this in just a moment. But coming up on the Hollywood picket lines, they're getting a bit thicker. After the break, we'll tell you the latest developments with that growing strike. Stay with us. I don't know if there's been a better time to start a brand new news operation.
The newsroom was pretty much starting from scratch.
It's fresh, it's innovative.
Lots of energy, lots of passionate reporters.
Knowing what we're starting here puts so much joy in my heart.
We have reporters who are embedded in these communities.
Many people throughout St. Clair Shores have been fighting to save this water tower.
If there's a miracle out there, get a hold of me.
We are part of the neighborhood. Our newsroom is part of your neighborhood.
Residents here on Stansbury say they are fed up with all this flooding that keeps happening.
We shouldn't have to live like this.
Telling the stories that otherwise nobody would know about.
Now, AJ, you went to the downtown boxing gym and you really got to see how this gym is impacting kids' lives.
Yeah, Chris, as soon as I walked in the building, it was very uplifting.
It's a boxing gym, but it's more than boxing. We do homework. We help them with the SAT.
When it comes to the weather, it's forecasting what's going to fall on your driveway, when is it going to happen, and how might it actually affect your day-to-day life.
Hundreds of people continue to call in reporting problems throughout the county.
Cleanup crews working all throughout Metro Detroit.
Get them down and get them cleaned up.
Local news to me means we're in your community, we're telling stories that matter to you, that affect you, that maybe we can get change and things done in your community.
She was born without a right arm, and then her legs didn't grow, I guess, the way that they should have.
But for 20-year-old Fortin High School alum Sumaya, she doesn't let that, or anything else for that matter, get in her way.
So you have a favorite button over there?
Yeah, do you want to dress it?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and...
This is my favorite.
I hope everyone watching that piece in particular says, I want to help that little girl and help that family and help get her to college.
Well, we are rethinking the way local news is done in the 21st century and how to tell the most important stories in a compelling way.
You can get news anywhere, but for us, we're a fresh face with a new perspective, and we're trying to make a difference in the community to tell stories that matter to you.
I think we're here to listen and actually hear what you're saying, and we're putting together a newscast that will show that.
I want to tell those people's stories because it's needed. Detroit is ready. Get ready, because here we come.
Reporting in Dearborn Heights.
Live in Wayne County.
Reporting in Adrian.
Live in Livonia.
Reporting from South Lyon, Kelly Vaughn.
CBS News Detroit.
CBS News Detroit.
Welcome back. And another blow to the entertainment industry. The union representing actors will be on the picket line tomorrow after failing to reach a deal with major Hollywood movie studios. This new strike is in addition to the Writers Guild strike that began back in May. Chris Holstrom reports from Los Angeles.
Hollywood is grinding to a halt after SAG-AFTRA, the union representing thousands of actors, voted to strike.
We had no choice.
Fran Drescher, star of The Nanny, is the union's president.
I cannot believe it, quite frankly. How far apart we are on so many things. How they plead poverty, that they're losing money left and right when giving hundreds of millions of dollars to their CEOs.
Many members of the union had already been on the picket line supporting the Writers Guild, which has been on strike since May.
They've been incredibly helpful and they bolstered our numbers.
Like the WGA, the Actors Union wants increases in basic pay, higher residuals for streaming content, and protection surrounding the use of artificial intelligence. The labor action comes as Hollywood struggles to adjust to major changes in the entertainment industry.
Theatrical box office is still down 25% or more versus pre-COVID. Linear television, broadcast and cable is dying a slow death. Audiences are shrinking and aging out of the advertiser-friendly demographic. And finally, in streaming, it requires enormous capital to compete with Netflix and build a worldwide competitive scripted television channel.
In a statement, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers wrote, "We are deeply disappointed that SAG-AFTRA has decided to walk away from negotiations. This is the union's choice, not ours," adding the move will deepen the financial hardship for thousands who depend on the industry. Chris Holmstrom, CBS News, Los Angeles.
All right, Merrick Masters and Rick Fanning still with us. There seems to be in both cases, we were talking about the big three and now with SAG, a lot of finger pointing at one another. But it doesn't sound like what they're asking for is all that outlandish on either end. So how do you decide who's in the right and maybe who's not?
Yeah, I think the devil's often in the details on these things. And there's, you know, they're not only negotiating the table, but particularly in you know, like SAG and actors, there's also negotiating in front of the public as well. Mm-hmm. And they want to get the public behind them, particularly when you see picketing, that they want to show a full picket line with actors, and that's why the actors have been helping the writers, because they're a lot more, you know the actors, you see them on TV, you see them on screen. So that kind of publicity, and so the finger pointing oftentimes can go on and take on almost a life of its own. When you're at the table, there's maybe even a little bit more communication going. In that case, I think it probably accurately reflects. I don't think Ms. Drescher is acting. I think that's truly what she's feeling. But you can have that finger pointing, and then oftentimes the issues at the table, what becomes contentious is exactly how things like streaming are going to be handled, when AI is exactly going to be used. And you see these new things coming into the marketplace, and the parties having to think not only about now, but what it means over the course of a 3 or 4 year contract. And so the devil's really in the details.
Yeah, and I think there's also concern from the actor's standpoint on the use of AI. In movies recently, they're creating different image and likeness.
There's concern about the use of AI and how it might replace their role. This is also a concern in the writer's strike, which is now in its 11th week. And they want some protections built in to protect jobs. I think job security is a big issue. They want more employment opportunities, higher staffing levels, and higher minimum wages. I saw some interesting statistics. SAG has about 160,000 members, and about half of them in any given year don't make any money at all. Only 5 to 15% of them make enough to earn their health care, which has a minimum threshold level. And it's a small percentage that make a middle class wage. Most of them, you think is the high paying actors, but they're an elite group. They're not your typical worker. And so this contract is really not about paying, the Kevin Costner's more money. It's about paying your average actor who may or may not have much business in a given year.
Yeah.
And they're struggling. And also during the pandemic, there was something else that was done that's interesting. That they call it, they do, in order to get considered for a role, they have to do now what are called self-tapes.
Yes.
And they have to tape themselves, and they have to pay for the cost doing that.
Yeah.
And that often requires that they invest in studios, and that's also proliferated the number of people who compete for those jobs, because everybody can get a tape of themselves and send it out and be considered. And so they, you know, they suffer those kinds of cost increases, and the industry has had advertising difficulties, and also there's been a shrinkage in the average number of episodes per show, so to speak. It's gone from about 18 to 10 over the past 12 years, and that means fewer opportunities to be paid. And so when the workers look at this, they're trying to say, we just want to set some basic minimums. We want higher standards, a little protection for your typical worker. And it's not the high-paid person that they're really talking about. It's the more run-of-the-mill person that comes and gets a bit part here and there, and is struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah. And when we're talking about the Writers Guild in particular, with the use of AI becoming more popular, do you see that as potentially threatening to their jobs in the future? What does it give the companies creative control?
I think that it's something that they're certainly concerned about, and they want to put parameters around of how much AI can be used, you know, not only from the actors but from the creative side.
Yeah.
And how much of, you know, how much of a script or a concept can be generated by AI versus how much by a person. And it almost harkens back to when in some of the manufacturing, when automation was first coming in and things were being done by robots and being done by more mechanized processes, and you saw unions like the UAW saying, hey, this is something new that's coming into our market, and we want to address this, and having to work with the employers to actually come out with those rules and those frameworks. And so you see the same thing in the writers. So I think that is something that they have publicly said they're very concerned about.
I think they look at AI from a production standpoint, and you look at writing, it comes with an initial idea, an initial draft of a script of a play or whatever the case might be, a show, and then it goes on to refining and editing. And AI may come in and they may say, well, we can do through AI, we can come up with an initial script.
Yeah.
And therefore all you need to do is a little bit of tinkering with this, and then we'll turn it over to some other person to do the editing, and your role will be restricted.
Yeah.
And so technology's always replaced labor to some extent.
Yeah.
And that's what it's used for. And I think the companies are going to look for every cost-saving device that they can find. It's no different from robotics. You know, when I would think that within 20 years from now, you will be hard-pressed to find a restaurant in which you find a waiter.
Oh gosh, yeah, I know. I worry about it even for my own job. You know, they can make an AI anchor.
Well,
you never
I'm
know
a
what
professor.
could happen.
I mean, you can teach. You can hire somebody an avatar to come in and they can do a PowerPoint presentation.
Probably put together a lesson plan too.
And
There are already apps for attorneys now, or the AI, writing briefs and things like that. And
some have been submitted to the Supreme Court. Actually, AI produced briefs. And they've gotten in trouble for doing that because they didn't catch some of the things. But you know, they'll work on it.
Well, we are going to talk a lot more about this ahead. But turning to the shipping industry, where the threat of a strike can impact millions. Stay with us.
I don't know if there's been a better time to start a brand new news operation.
The newsroom was pretty much starting from scratch.
It's fresh, it's innovative.
Lots of energy, lots of passionate reporters.
Knowing what we're starting here puts so much joy in my heart.
We have reporters who are embedded in these communities.
Many people throughout St. Clair Shores have been fighting to save this water tower.
If there's a miracle out there, get a hold of me. We are part of the neighborhood. Our newsroom is part of your neighborhood.
Residents here on Stansbury say they are fed up with all this flooding that keeps happening.
We shouldn't have to live like this.
Telling the stories that otherwise nobody would know about. Now, AJ, you went to the downtown boxing gym and you really got to see how this gym is impacting kids' lives.
Yeah, Chris, as soon as I walked in the building, it was very uplifting.
It's a boxing gym, but it's more than boxing. You know, we do homework. We help them with the SAT.
When it comes to the weather, it's forecasting what's going to fall on your driveway, when is it going to happen, and how might it actually affect your day-to-day life.
Hundreds of people continue to call in reporting problems throughout the county.
Cleanup crews working all throughout Metro Detroit. Get them down and get them cleaned up. Local news to me means we're in your community, we're telling stories that matter to you, that affect you, that maybe we can get change and things done in your community.
She was born without a right arm, and then her legs didn't grow, I guess, the way that they should have.
But for 20-year-old Fortune High School alum Sumaya, she doesn't let that, or anything else for that matter, get in her way.
So you have a favorite button over there?
Yeah, you want to press it?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and...
This is my favorite.
I hope everyone watching that piece in particular says, I want to help that little girl and help that family and help get her to college.
Well, we are rethinking the way local news is done in the 21st century and how to tell the most important stories in a compelling way.
You can get news anywhere, but for us, we're a fresh face with a new perspective, and we're trying to make a difference in the community to tell stories that matter to you.
I think we're here to listen and actually hear what you're saying, and we're putting together a newscast that will show that.
I want to tell those people's stories because it's needed. Detroit is ready. Get ready, because here we come.
Reporting in Dearborn Heights.
Live in Wayne County. Reporting in Adrian.
Live in Livonia.
Reporting from South Lyon, Kelly Vaughn.
CBS News Detroit.
Welcome back to CBS News Detroit at 7. We are continuing our conversation about labor negotiations, but now we're turning to UPS, where negotiations between the company have stalled and the threat of a strike in the coming weeks is looming. Both sides are pointing the finger at each other about the talks ending, but the threat of a strike could have major impacts for both consumers and the company. If workers do walk out, it could be the largest strike against a single employer in our country's history. Last year, UPS delivered an average of 24.3 million packages a day, which is more than any competitor could take on. And for historical context, the last UPS strike was in 1997. It lasted 15 days and cost the company $850 million. That is just, I would think, in hearing things like that, that would be so much more of a push for the company to try to come to some sort of a resolution. That's a lot of money to lose.
It certainly is, and that's why companies do try to come to settlements, but they also think long term. And they think, okay, that's the year one cost and it's a huge amount of money. But if we put things in the contract that have a business model that aren't sustainable, then over maybe not this year, but next year and over the life of a contract, and then once those terms come into a contract, they do have a way of sticking for a series of contracts. So you're thinking out from, 97, some of the things that they were worried about then are still in the contracts now, and that affects their costs. So they do take a long term. So even though those year one numbers seem huge, the company will be doing the math and looking at it and saying, okay, over not only short term but long term, what do these things add to the contract and how sustainable are they? And what business, as Dr. Masters mentioned, what business, what other pressures, what other competitors do we have out there, and what are our needs, and how are the demands of the consumer now, where we order something, we expect it on our front door, like by the time we're close the computer.
Yeah.
So meeting those demands and being competitive and those long costs are all things that factor into that decision. But I agree, $850 million.
Yeah,
and
in
1997 money is quite a lot of money.
That is a ton of money.
It's a lot of money, but let's put it into perspective. The company had over $100 billion in revenue last year. It made over $11.5 billion in profit, And it's got 545,000 workers. 444,000 of them are hourly workers. This is globally. And so its wage costs are enormous. And when the Teamsters ask for certain things, it is going to have a significant impact on its fixed costs, its ability to compete, and with the variety of different competitors, people have a lot of choices. They can go to the post office, they can go to FedEx, they have a number of other alternatives they can go to get their packages delivered to Amazon, and so they don't need necessarily to rely exclusively on UPS. And UPS is in a situation where it will not only lose money, but it will lose business. I mean, people will go someplace else. And there are firms that, whose contracts may be about ready to expire now that are renegotiating them with, that may renegotiate with another provider because they want to pick somebody who isn't going to have a strike and cost them, business at a critical point in time. So, but I mean, the company has a difficult act, as does the union, in terms of trying to balance these things because its capital costs are enormous.
Yeah.
It's got a whole fleet of trucks. You think when they talk about they're going to heat them all, they're going to air condition them all, that's not an inexpensive proposition.
No, it's not.
And they're going to have to pay them higher wages. And they've got over half of the members that would be out on strike are part-time workers. And this is really very much a strike over what the wage will be of part-time workers, and that's a point of great contention. And a large percentage of them are women, and so from the union's point of view, they feel that they have to represent these workers and provide a decent living wage for them. They have to balance that against, and I think O'Brien comes in it from the same perspective, that's the president of the Teamsters, as does Sean Fain. It's a different perspective. He's a sort of a dissident leader throughout the old faction, the old Hoffa faction, so to speak, as Fain throughout the administration caucus faction and at least part of the UAW leadership. And they're going to approach these from a different point of view, and their expectations from employers are different. And I think they're going to be much more strident, particularly in rhetoric, and they may be more willing to use the ultimate weapon in both cases than they have been in recent iterations of negotiations. But it's important to remember that in 2019 there was a strike. The UAW struck GM. It lasted for 40 days. It cost the company $3 billion.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody wins in a strike. I think it hurts the workers. They're ultimately the most vulnerable because they've got everything on the line. The company has reserves. They can survive at least for a short period of time. It may damage their business over the longer term, but I agree with what he said that they've got to find a path and to deal with these complex, sensitive issues that they're dealing with people's lives.
Yeah. And before, please.
No, I was going to say that's the important point, not only on the lives of the workers of those companies, but particularly in auto, the suppliers and the other members of our community here in Metro Detroit, where that we're already seeing clients begin to ask questions about, okay, planning for the eventuality if there's a strike at one of the big three, what does that mean for their business and their employees and their lives? So it really has a huge impact.
And with the community, it has an impact on all of us. If we're talking movies, UPS, and all of that, we're going to feel the implications whether we work with them or don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the UPS drivers, they move 6% of America's gross domestic product a year.
Wow.
6% of it.
Wow. Well, thank you guys so much for being here and help give us some insight on everything.